Welcome to another collective conversation. I am your host, Mike Brewer, and we are joined by our dear friend now, Dom Beveridge, the principal at 20 for 20. Dom, welcome to the show.
Good to be back again.
Again and again and again. I think we were just discussing this is your fourth time on the show.
There we go. What happens when I get five? Do I get some award or something?
When you write another 20 for 20, you come back on the show, then we're going to have a plaque or we're going to send you a watch. How about that?
Excellent.
Well, hey, Dom, I very much look forward to the paper that you author every year. It's sort of a look back on the year prior and a look forward to the year to come. And I think the first 20 for 20, I actually talked to you. I think that was the first one, right? When we met down in Orlando.
I think you were the very first interviewee for the very first edition. So
I didn't know that.
I think that's right. That was the first time that was the first time I met you as well. So there we go. It's a relationship as old as the book.
I like that. Well, you've released the latest edition, and I print it like same day, right? And I'm always anxious to talk to you, but I'm always anxious to read every single word before I actually sit down to have a conversation with you. And I always appreciate the insightfulness that you put and the work and the effort and the investment you put into these documents. And it seems like it's grown. Like this year's was like 50 pages. It's like I had to read it in two settings.
Yeah. No, it takes it takes a while to put it together, but it's I mean, it's basically there are three main sections to the book, right? And one of the sort of quite religious things that I follow with it is that there's a section that's about people's outlook. There's a section that's about what people are doing, and then there's a section that's about that's a bit more opinion forward on what do we think this all means. But the two main sections are very much about synthesizing these 20 conversations and just straight reporting, just trying to not impart any opinion on it, but just to literally say what we heard in a way that isn't too boring to read. That's basically the challenge, and it ends up being quite a long book, but people seem to like the fact that there's a lot in it.
Yeah, it really is fantastic. I like the anonymous nature of it, so you never really directly or you don't attribute quotes to anybody, and I really like that sort of the mystery in that. I think it lends a degree of authenticity to it that I think is different than other magazines or articles or blogs that you read where you're getting attribution or giving attribution. But so I thought about a title today, and here's my title. Let me know what you think about this. BI to AI to centralization to outsourcing to extinction. What do you think about that?
So the extinction part is kind of distracting. In that, BI to AI to centralization with the first three,
and then outsourcing.
Couple of thoughts. We can get into some of the specific findings, but I do see the future of AI, at least when we think about the kinds of AI that are doing operational work, stuff that we traditionally associate with people doing. I do see the trends of centralization and AI adoption as being interlinked, like very much interlinked. There's lots of reasons for that we can go into. So I get that. I see BI is fascinating this year because you can tell that it's the desire to know more stuff about your business that seems to be driving it. And historically, people always talked about BI like it was this piece of software that they implemented, or it was this report that we rolled out. But there's much more of a maturity and an appetite for kind of insight that drives action. And the more sophisticated, better resourced companies, you can tell they're starting to experiment with AI. They're trying to figure out if there's insights to be had from their data in places that humans wouldn't necessarily think to look, right? So I see BI to AI to centralization there. Outsourcing, there was actually one one of the most interesting centralization models was one company was not only taking admin off property, they were outsourcing admin shared services to a third party. So they were going almost cold turkey from we've got assistant property managers who do all this bookkeeping, collections, blah, 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 all of this kind of stuff to we're pushing all of that out to a third party provider. So that definitely gets the kind of ballsiest play kind of award for me out of this year's responses. But I'm fascinated to see what they learn from that.
Yeah, as I was thinking about this, as I was reading through the document, and I was thinking about sort of the evolution or whatever you want to call it of sort of technology making its way into the space and how people are utilizing the different technologies. I guess the thesis I made up in my head was BI and it becomes sort of this informant of places where you could implement artificial intelligence or because I could sit back as a human, right? And I could think about the areas that I think AI would be make an impact or create efficiency or whatever premise there is. But in my head, the BI, as long as you got good data going in the front side, right, it's probably going to do a better job of identifying those areas where you can make application of AI and then ultimately where centralization would come into play is sort of creating those types of efficiencies or
It's an
streamlining.
interesting perspective because so we do have that constraint in multifamily that the general size of data sets tends to be like relatively small. So much of this the kind of big data what used to be called big data, but the stuff that people are turning AI loose. You just don't have the dimensions of data that are sort of big enough to get the leverage that you might in scenarios that don't have that constraint on them. But if you think about things like what drives what drives renewals, like just really broad questions like that are very sort of multifactorial. Where if you've got a portfolio of properties, there might be enough observations that if you can cast the net broadly enough, like there might well be insights into the things that you could do that have a beneficial impact on renewals. That's one of the it's one of my favorite things that when IT vendors tell you that we're going to increase renewal rates by X%. It's the kind of take that attracts this very natural sort of skepticism from property managers. But maybe there are actually things that you could figure out statistically if you were looking in enough places to find out. And I guess the corollary of that is that if you find through an AI you can identify new insights like that, maybe the AI can start to take decisions about it and actually start doing stuff that drives the outcome that it just identified. So you may well be right, but I see most of the work seems to be highly exploratory that people are looking to do in 2023.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I think I know we may talk about AI at some point in this conversation, but it seems like, or at least my loose understanding of OpenAI right now is the real power of OpenAI is when, and I think they did this recently, they opened up the API so that you could mix your own data from your company into the data with the broader internet set, right? And so there are various tranches of data that you can mix together. And when you're able to do that, then because BI to me is a data collection, right? It's a place that brings data together, curates it in a place. So you mix that data together with this broader set of data or these broader tranches of data, and that's where you start to get these insights that, in my head at least, start to become subject to AI. Act to your point, making a decision based on that data, and then sort of segueing to centralization, which I think is a jumping off point for a question I have for you. Bringing that together into a smaller group of people that actually take actions and create behaviors out of that is interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I increasingly just following the interviews this year, I see I see whatever ends up happening with centralization across the industry being very much interlinked with the adoption pattern for AI. It's one of the things that I noticed, as I went through the results. You can sort of see there's an adoption pattern already with AI where people are still looking at it like, they're sort of acquiring widgets that do pieces of work for them, right? Which is sort of the wrong way to look at it, right? The problems inevitably just keep getting smaller and smaller if all you're doing is just taking bits of work off your plate. And instead, you've got this model that has the potential to just add this leverage into your operating model. It occurred to me as I was thinking that very few companies have made any meaningful progress on actually centralizing their leasing model. Like, you go to industry conferences, you think everyone was doing it, and we're all well on the way. In reality, we aren't. Like, there's a small number of companies that are making progress on it. Their results are being marketed aggressively across the industry, and everyone kind of thinks. But when you look at who's actually done things like taken agents offsite and put them in a different location and actually done centralization stuff, it's not. There aren't that many companies that have done that yet. What the thing that's common with AI between the companies that have made progress on something like leasing is they've kind of viewed the AI as foundational in delivering that service, right? And you're an early adopter of AI, like with Radco, right? That was one of the things I remember we talked. I think you're the first person I ever talked to about this as an actual user in multifamily, like 4-5 years ago, whenever it was that you were doing your pilot. But the idea of saying we're going to sort of reinvent leasing so that most of the work is going to be done on contact is going to be done by AI. Now, how do we fit people into this model? That's a very different kind of perspective from, let's use AI to turn the phones off so that our property leasing staff don't have to answer them anymore. Do you see what I mean? I think the people that have made the progress on changing their actual model put AI at the center of how the new model was going to work, and it seems to work really well.
Yeah, and does this tie into you used, I think it was, is it Mark Andreessen or this guy's from Salesforce, right? You quote him in this paper. He asks a question that
Yeah.
leads to.
Well, yeah. So he was saying the question that people are not asking is, what do people do? Like, that's the thing that he said people should. He was talking about stuff like, he used the example of, AI can already generate better art than all but a really small number of people on Earth, right? And so is art, as we currently think of it, ultimately as good, as productive, a creative outlet for people as we historically have thought that it was, right? So he was asking sort of big picture question like that. But again, asking the question, what do people do, rather than which of my tasks can I get AI to do, is a much better way around to think of it.
Yeah, I thought that was so. Yeah, to your point about adopting and implementing a technology just to take care of a one-off problem and then doing that 25 times has not really potentially leveraged, not at least not fully, the power. I think another point you make in this document is AI is better at mass than it is, right? Than it
Yeah,
is solving these little bitty problems. It can solve these little bitty problems, but it's better at mass.
yeah. Well, again, if you think about going back to that example of people who've changed their leasing models, where I would characterize AI as foundational in the way that their whole model now works, those companies now have leverage in their model, right? So there's no change. If AI is just answering the phones for people, and you still have a leasing agent in each property, you haven't changed. You've added a capability which may add value. You've added a cost, but you haven't really changed anything. Like the relationship between how many properties or how many units I manage and how many staff I have to employ remains linear, right? But the companies that have made AI foundational, it's no longer linear, right? I can grow the number of properties that I own, and I don't have to necessarily add as much resource each time I take over a new property or new properties. And there's a couple of reasons why I think that's really important. One is the processes will work better, right? I just think it's a better relationship between robots and people that those companies have found. The other thing, though, is that the AI itself is really valuable, right? Because again, that thing I was saying, where the problems get smaller and smaller if all you're doing is taking work off a human's plate. If the AI is adding leverage into your model and improving the way you deliver service, that's a really, 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 really valuable thing, and people will naturally pay more money for it. As the problems get smaller and smaller, it gets harder and harder to see how you maintain an ecosystem of vendors when they're all just doing little bits and pieces when they could be actually transforming the way that you deliver important functions that cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, that's right. So so is this an? It seems like an interesting segue. I interviewed Jindu Lee from HappyCo recently, and obviously Jindu is in the well, I actually think he's trying to take over the world, but he's sort of started out with these HappyCo inspections. So I sort of sometimes associate it with just maintenance, and this particular jumping off point for me, uh, they're layering something over the top of technology that is super interesting. And I think you listened to the episode. I'm interested in your sort of take on that.
Yeah, no, I love that episode. I love that episode. And I love chatting with Jindo as well. Just one of the really good guys in the industry. But the thing, I was actually chatting with him about this the other day. We were talking about the way that they've introduced a service layer that ultimately provides different options for how you can organize maintenance. And the thing that was just fascinating to me about it was it's very, very consistent with the ways that people are making progress in centralizing maintenance. Maintenance is very much the sort of lowest priority. Maybe lowest priority is the wrong way to look at it. It's the thing that people are the least motivated to work on right now. Partly just because it's hard. Right, maintenance is harder to centralize maintenance than it is to centralize leasing. It's harder to centralize leasing than it is to centralize admin. But also there are these natural sources of inertia that stop people wanting to change the way that maintenance is delivered. And the thing I mentioned in the book is that the few companies that are making progress on changing their model are basically doing something that's way more like the way that it works in single family, right? So, a single family, you have no on-premise component to the delivery of maintenance. What that means is that every time you get a work order, somebody has to make a decision about, right, who's doing this work and when is it going to get scheduled and how much is it going to cost. There's usually a direct cost associated with it. So you've got these very natural incentives to figure out efficient ways to do stuff. Like if there's a way that, even things like orientating your delivery towards proactive rather than reactive maintenance. Like because there's direct costs associated with it, there are natural incentives to do that in single family. If you think about multifamily, you don't really have to make any of those decisions when a work order comes in. There's a number of texts in a property that constitutes what you call a lump of labor, right? And that just gets consumed as work orders come in. And it's almost like, well, I fix broken stuff or I stop stuff from breaking. It's all the same. It doesn't cost me any different. So you don't have the natural incentives that they do in single family to make your model more efficient. And I see, but the people, the most interesting model I see property management companies doing is when they sort of change the reporting line so that you no longer have maintenance techs reporting into property managers. You have them report into like a regional head, which means you're now much more like managing a pool of resources, which means I've now got options to sort of specialize the way that we do stuff. there's a benefit to building a picture of, okay, well, what's the kind of work that we do? What are the most efficient ways of organizing to get that kind of work done? And the companies that seem to be making progress in this are sort of taking these baby steps. They start by changing the way that they manage it, and then they're taking these baby steps of getting more specialized, getting more efficient, having like a bit more variety of roles that they do. And when I think about the vast majority of the people I spoke to who are not actively working on this right now, I sort of see a lot of property managers kind of looking for a viable step to take. Like, what could I do that would make progress on this without like breaking anything? And the thing that I like about what Jindo and his team are doing is that they seem to be offering quite a nice step into let's deal with the sort of coordination and dispatch thing. Let's put a service layer onto it, and that way we've got some control over what's happening with the work orders. Is this work order urgent or isn't it? Is it you're starting to do some sort of triage. You can offer a service element to residents, many of whom quite like the idea of troubleshooting a problem on the phone rather than waiting for a maintenance tech to come. And you can see a path towards a model that just works more centrally, works more like a single family model that I think would ultimately improve the way that it's done in multifamily.
Yeah, it backs me up. So I want to back up and ask you a question related to everything that you just said, I think. And how would you define centralization? Because I think right now there are a couple different definitions of centralization, or centralization means a couple of different things to people out in the marketplace. And I'm just interested in knowing how you think about that word, centralization.
Yeah, so I think the working definition that I really used in the book is like a change in processes and roles, where roles traditionally performed at property get moved somewhere else to where they can be done more efficiently. So, rolling out the tech elements and not changing your property staffing model, not centralization. That's but people call it that, right? So what I said. I think the first conclusion I drew is that centralization it's not really the right word for what's actually going on in the industry, and it seems to be shorthand for a lot of different things, that most of which don't actually involve centralizing anything. So yeah, it's a very, very broad catch-all term that describes a lot of sort of processy stuff that's to do with property management.
Yeah, I think way back. So let's say this was, I don't want to age myself too much, but let's say it was like 15. No, it was probably like 16, 17 years ago. So Equity Residential. I worked for Equity Residential at the time. And at that time, they started to, what I would call, based on your first definition, the work physically leaves one space and is physically sitting in a different space.
Mm-hmm.
They started to centralize the assistant manager's role at the time, the ins, the outs, the renewal activity, et cetera, et cetera. They were doing that like 15, 16, 17 years ago. And they removed the assistant manager out of the equation, and one assistant manager started to do the work of like five assistant managers, because now they're sitting in an environment where they are not distracted by the phone or residents coming in or doing things of that nature. They were doing rote and routine work. And they started that effort a long, long time ago. And so fast forward to today, where others, I mean, we started doing centralization in the same way under the same thesis, likely because I worked at Equity and I saw that it worked. it versus what I think, to your second sort of definition of that, which is not really a definition of centralization, to your point, it really is like streamlining, or it's Six Sigma, or it's lean thinking, right? It's that is a whole different sort of discipline that people are doing, but calling it centralization. And I think the hard part about maintenance is that they're thinking about it that way. How do we make this more efficient and streamlined? Not how do you, to your point about single family homes, how do you take those people and put them in a physical location and then do labor distribution based on your pointy skill set, right? I'm an HVAC guy, I'm an electrician, I'm a this, I'm a that, right? And then doing your labor distribution based on those skill sets. But thank you for helping validating what I have in my head because I've been confused as of late.
It's fascinating though the property admin and the assistant property manager role and the decentralization thereof. It's a model that's worked for like a really long time in the REITs. I'm not entirely sure why it didn't sort of catch on, like why people didn't copy it. Because what you see when you look at the results. So first of all, it's obviously the area where the most progress is being made. It's in actually centralizing stuff. Like nearly half of people were at some stage of they'd either taken those roles off or were in the process of taking those roles off property. So it's much more prevalent that people are doing that. Although you never hear about it, right? It's not the thing that people mostly talk about. It's leasing. When you when you listen to when you go to the conferences and stuff. I've got this suspicion now. I mean, it's a very small sample size because so few people are actually centralizing leasing operations just yet. But I've got this theory that if I were running a property management company and I really wanted to centralize leasing, the first thing I think I would do is centralize admin functions because it just looks like a really natural fit. Like there's lots of templates for how it works really well. I suspect once you start thinking about it to any extent at all, you sort of realize, well, it was never that good of an idea to have those things go on a property in the first place. Right. So, and admin lends itself generally to shared service environments. So yeah, I mean, it just seems like it's such a good fit that if you figure out how to centralize that first, yeah. The other thing, what everyone tells you who's actually done like the leasing centralization, they tell you the technology part is easy. The hard part is all about moving people's cheese, just redefining roles, just figuring out how the people side of it is going to work, how the handoffs between, for example, AI and people work. Like that by far is the hardest part of leasing, not the bit where you roll out the technology. So yeah, given that you get direct experience of making these changes to traditional property roles by doing admin that's easier, I think I would definitely want to do that first and then put leasing next in line, which I think is what several of the companies that I spoke to are doing.
I'm interested where if accounting falls into an administrative function. I've had it in my head as of late, and this was validated by somebody that I think it was 2 weeks ago. I was sitting on a council and I heard somebody say this, and I thought, oh my goodness, I've been thinking about that. Anyway, you think about this, and I'm going to make a blanket statement, so it's not really intended to be blanket, but traditionally, property managers have not been great at the financial piece of our business, right? The P&L statement, the balance sheet, and things of that nature, variance reports. I can tell you, the thing that I hit my head against the wall with every single month is reading variance notes that I'm like, it did just blow my mind. But the point being that accounting to me, and I know P&Ls and things of that nature. There's accounting. This is different. Anyway, look, I think that particular function of our business could go away. That you don't require a property manager to. I mean, you could argue they need to be in tune with your property financially, but do they? If you have other people who are the subject matter experts in that and doing that, and you leave your property manager to do the real sort of people-oriented, touchy-feely, relationship-oriented type work. Anybody out there working on that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, so people, again, that idea that we've been promoting leasing agents into roles that were predominantly about bookkeeping is quite suboptimal. Like, I think if it wasn't obvious already, it really gets exposed when people start to actually change the roles. Like there's people who are good at accounting, like let them focus on the accounting. And in fact, the company that was completely outsourcing admin to shared services, the interesting thing about them was that they wanted everybody who works at property to explicitly be focused on sales. They just wanted all property roles to be sales focused, and that means they wanted all of the other stuff out and
Yeah.
into place where it can be done better. The other thing is like, so one of the questions I asked to people who interviewees who I knew had been running centralized models for admin for a while. The question I asked them was, "What's left to do?" Right? Because you've taken accounting off, you got maybe collections, you got other stuff you've taken off site, and they're like, "Oh, there's plenty more to do." And they start to talk about things like renewals, for example, whether you see that as a leasing or as an admin function, or a service delivery function that where you can expand the scope of what you think of as admin to sort of include that. But they just see more and more aspects of what we do at property that could be handled better by an expert team, a technology-enabled expert team. I think something like collections is interesting because you have people. That's another good example of a widget that people are rolling out. Like people are doing collections AI. Because again, I don't imagine anybody would regret losing the collections part of the who wants to call people to get them to pay rent, right? But the but I think the way that people are approaching that as a sort of widget that takes this job off my hands is limited. But I do think the idea that in a shared service for admin, where we design a collections process where 90% of the work, which is about calling people, prompting them, just figuring out what reaction you got, figuring out what step to take next, like all of that stuff can mostly be handled by AI. Again, you redesign the shared service on a foundation of AI, and you put the people into the sort of appropriate supervisory, escalatory kind of role in that. Again, that's great because you've now that I bet you get better outcomes that way, because if you're relying on people to reliably do a job that sucks, you can you can be pretty well guaranteed that you're going to get an improvement in outcomes when you get a robot on the case instead. I think.
I, I believe that to be true. It takes me back you're sort of narrating that. It takes me back to one of the driving principles. Again, I'm referring back to equity residential, and this was probably not their novel thought. It was probably something like Bain or other consultings, but management by exception, right? And I think to your point, AI handles 90% of the work, thereby creating the exceptions that it can't do, but the human can do and should do. And I think to your other implied point there is you're doing it with fewer people. The fewer people are doing that 10% of the work. And at least in my head, it's easier to lead and manage, like 5 people instead of 50 people. And
Yeah,
it keeps everything tighter in
yeah,
my
because
head.
it's 50 people that turn over frequently as well, right? So you've got to accomplish consistency by constantly focusing on the training lever, but there's a hole in the bucket, right? Because people just keep leaving. But if you've got a core team that can be focused on being really good, answering the question, Mark Andreessen's question, right? What do people do? Like, let's focus them on the thing that they'll do really well. That's a much more makeable play than trying to get 50 different individuals who might only be with you for a year to be consistent in doing this process that they don't like doing.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah, and I think one of the things I go back to my days at Mills Properties in St. Louis, and I remember having a sort of a debate with she was our lead accountant. I can't remember her title. It doesn't matter. She kept saying to me, I kept arguing that somebody that's doing one sort of routine piece of the work is going to get bored and sick and tired of it. And her retort to me was, no way. That person loves doing this thing. They love doing it in isolation in some cases, and they're much more productive and they're much more fulfilled because they're in that sort of thriving zone for themselves. And lo and behold, we hire somebody. They start working in our office. They wear a stocking cap and headphones all day long, and they, you know, And I every time I would talk to the person, it was like simple yes and no questions, but they were like the most happy, fulfilled person, like,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
she proved out her point. And I think you could probably find five of those people easier than you can find these 50 people
Yes,
that
yes,
turn over a lot, right? It makes
yeah,
recruiting a lot easier, I think.
definitely, definitely. Yeah, and it's and although when I think about maintenance, I think of it's very clearly a much less technology. The solution is far less to do with technology and far more to do with organization and process and people. But you know what I was thinking of when we were when you were talking with Jindo the other day. Do you remember when we did that workshop in Atlanta a few years ago, where we actually we were doing a case study, weren't we, on mobile maintenance, just on how it works at property, and we brought in. It was the end of a day of workshops. We brought in a couple of maintenance techs from a couple of your properties in Atlanta, and we served wine for the executive team, and we just did this Q&A to ask them about to just ask them about what it was like using the mobile maintenance tool that had been rolled out, and just the sort of night and day difference between what everybody expected or what everyone intended when they did this project and the reality when it's told to you by the people doing the actual process. You remember how big of a gap it was between between the two?
Yeah, it's amazing what we can sit around in a corporate office and dream up and create for ourselves. And then I remember the same thing to when we rolled Lisa out, the AI leasing consultant, back way before they went to Appfolio. I remember sitting with Elliot in our boardroom, and he brought Lisa up, and it was a bunch of code, right, like on a screen. And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
think to ask the question, like, how does that work on the front side? What is the user experience out in the field? And I remember traveling around after the fact, doing a sort of a road show to sell everybody on the idea of Lisa. And I took the time to have a leasing consultant show me what Lisa was. And really it was just like, it was my Outlook inbox with an email from somebody called Lisa. And I don't know why in my head I had this whole different picture of what that actually was. But then I took the time to learn about, or what I discovered was it wasn't as efficient in some cases as I thought it was, especially where it was handing off from the tech to the person, right? And those sorts of things. But in my head, it was like the most beautiful, perfect system on the planet Earth, and it was going to solve all of our problems. I think I even said to you, for the first time ever, LRO is going to be optimized on the traffic side, and that was long before I learned that Yardi and other technologies don't play well together. No offense, Yardi.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, what do you? I mean, given that you've just got a longer experience with having AI do operational stuff than most people do, like what's changed about the way you see the technology, and what if anything like excites you about it now?
I've had this utopian thought that at some point we would be able. So Bill Gates had this vision to put computers on every desk because he wanted his operating system on it. He wanted to rule the world. And I'm on a mission to take all of those devices out of the equation, completely off the desks. And it doesn't mean we don't have screens in our office that might be there for demonstration purposes and things of that nature. But I think what I'm most excited about is getting that rote and routine work and those things that cause boredom and distraction. And I think distraction is the right word, out of the hands of people who don't like to do it, and in some cases are not very good at it. And it leaves this space where they can actually look people in the eye, and they're
Mhm.
not distracted by, oh, wait a minute, I got to stop and type that into the system, or I've got to look that up before I can answer your question. It leaves room for getting back to what I think is the foundation for really good business, and that is relationship, right?
Mm.
And I think we're at a point where I'm really excited about the next 24 months plus minus, and that's me licking my finger and waving it in the air. But I think that somebody out there or a combination of people are going to find the right recipe for making that vision finally come true. And it's going to be a combination of the BI informant, the automation of the work, the centralization based on that automation, and then I think outsourcing work uh, is a key component to this too. And then I think ultimately you're going to get to that point where you can come to work and hang out with your friends. And most of what happens
Well,
in business is
it's interesting. I can't remember whether you and I talked about this before, but I guess around the time that OpenAI came out, I just immediately just start thinking about, okay, well, what really radical stuff is going to change as a result of this? Like I started seeing, when people were talking about some of the applications of it to marketing, like B2B marketing, you'd read about people saying, well, this is great because now, a copywriter who's going to write, an article about like SWOT analysis or something, instead of having to like research it, they can now get OpenAI to essentially synthesize all the best stuff on the internet, and it'll suddenly become really quick to write it. And the digital assistant is obviously going to write the content really quickly, and so it's going to be this massive increase in efficiency. And I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, why? What's the point in those articles now? Like just the whole enterprise of, I'm going to write an article about this thing for the benefit of SEO, so that people will come to my site to learn stuff about this. Like, if the source of your content is other people's content, I don't get why it's going to be worth doing those jobs, right? Because if I can just ask ChatGPT, find the most highly rated book on SWOT analysis, and write me a 1,000 word précis with examples from the real estate industry. Like, why would I bother going to somebody else's article on the internet? It's Draw Pollock, like the writer, but he's really good. He's really good follow for multifamily and for like future of work and that kind of stuff. He's always talking about the winner takes most economy. And when I think about it, I was actually talking to an editor about this in the week. Like, I feel like all the incentives lean towards you have to want to be the ultimate source that the AI is drawing from. Do you know what I mean? Being really good at original stuff, being the thing that people want to find their way to, right? It seems to me the incentives for that are far greater, and the derivative products that accounts for like much of what we do in marketing right now, I don't see how they don't become irrelevant, right? Because everything can be made to order like instantly, right? So yeah, much of business B2B SEO just becomes a waste of time, because nobody needs Google to find articles that won't be as good as the thing that I can instantly get written by. So yeah, I think about stuff like that. It's really shortening the distance between 2 points in terms of getting to good ideas. That's probably the thing that enthuses me the most about it.
I know we're running up against a time constraint, and I could open a whole can of worms here because I think to your point, think about this in the future, probably not too far away. If I'm looking for an apartment and I'm using an AI copilot to do that, that AI copilot still has to go out and find this data, right? And so if I say I'm looking for an apartment in Reynoldstown, and because the AI knows me, it knows that I like a south-facing apartment. It knows lots of things, right? And it's going to go out and it's going to find the one, right, or the three. And to your point about building the content that yields the result to the AI copilot, right? I want to
Yeah,
be
well, yeah.
that.
So again, if you think how that relates to the thing that I was just describing in the B2B world, I think in multifamily, I mean, multifamily is already well on the way to this anyway. But I've been talking to a lot of people about websites lately, and you can tell that basically having immersive, beautiful, very specific content that puts people in the apartment, like that's the thing that people aspire to anyway. But you think if you're the source of that information, I mean, presumably, OpenAI is going to be able to say, an apartment that are like that's available now, that's within this price range, that has like white countertops, not grey ones. I don't know, like everything that you could see is going to be potentially, just targeted by this very very powerful AI.
That's right, but you're gonna want to be the yield, right? You're gonna want to be one of those results, right?
Yes,
And I
yes.
guess what I can't put my head around yet is you still have to do something to present as one of these three options, or one option or two, whatever. There's still some value on the backside of that to create
Mhm.
you as an option, right?
Yeah, I guess it's like it becomes less about, much of marketing is about laying the sort of breadcrumbs to the thing that you're trying to get people to look at. The breadcrumbs are going to become less and less relevant. It's the thing that you're trying to lead people to, because there's so much processing power is going to be bringing people to like the best content that fits what they're looking for. That again, all the rewards seem to be for like, I want the absolute best, most detailed, most immersive, most beautiful, like lifelike experience that increasingly people are going to find easier and easier to find.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. So double down on everything. That's
Yes.
like, get your AI Copilot to double down on everything.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
hey,
exactly.
Dom, I know you got a hard stop. It is absolutely always a pleasure to speak with you. And I do mean it when I say I appreciate the time and the effort and the investment you put into authoring these books. They're fantastic. And I look forward to reading them every time. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you for yours. Always great to speak, and have a great weekend.
You too, sir. For everyone else, we'll see you next time on Collective Conversations.